The morning I found Mara Vale sitting on the kitchen floor, holding a broken coffee mug like it was the last piece of her life, I knew the rule she had given me on the first day was already doomed. She had smiled then, tired but beautiful, and said, "Don't fall in love with me." I laughed because I thought she was joking. But by sunrise that Tuesday, with golden light spilling through the apartment window and tears shining on her face, I understood she had not been warning me about love. She had been warning me about pain. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that happen when broken people refuse to give up on each other, please like, comment, share this story, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Your support helps more heartfelt stories reach people who may need hope today. My name is Arvin Hale, and when I moved into apartment 4B above a closed-down bakery on Clement Street, I was not looking for love. I was looking for silence. I had just lost my mother after 8 months of hospital rooms, unpaid bills, and pretending to be strong until strength felt like a costume I could no longer wear. The city kept moving around me as if grief was not standing in the middle of every crosswalk. People laughed in cafes, buses sighed at corners, delivery riders shouted over traffic, and I carried my mother's old suitcase into that apartment feeling like the last person on earth who remembered she had existed. Mara opened the door wearing a faded green sweater, her dark hair tied loosely, sunlight resting on her cheek like it had chosen her. She had paint on her fingers and exhaustion under her eyes. The apartment smelled of cinnamon, rain, and turpentine. There were canvases stacked against the walls, plants on the windowsill, and a small wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs. She studied me for a moment, not rudely, but as if she could see the storm I had dragged in with my bags. Then she stepped aside and said the room was down the hall. Before I could thank her, she added, almost casually, "One rule, Arvin. Don't fall in love with me." I smiled because it sounded like something from a movie. She did not smile back. She only picked up a paintbrush from the table and said she meant it. I told her I was too tired for love anyway. That was the first honest thing I said to her. For the first few weeks, we lived like 2 ghosts sharing the same walls. I left early for my job at a print shop and came home when the sun was still up, because Mara insisted the apartment felt safer in daylight. She worked from home painting portraits for clients who wanted their dogs, grandparents, or wedding photos turned into soft, glowing memories. She barely slept. Sometimes I heard her pacing at dawn. Sometimes I found her standing by the window, watching the street as if waiting for someone who should never arrive. But the daylight changed things. Every morning, she made tea and opened every curtain. She said the sun made lies harder to believe. I never asked what that meant. I was too busy trying not to fall apart. I would sit at the kitchen table, staring at bills, hospital letters, and old photographs of my mother in younger days when her laugh filled rooms. Mara never pushed. She would simply slide a cup toward me, warm and silent. Some people comfort you by asking questions. Mara comforted me by not forcing me to answer them. One Saturday afternoon, while the sky was bright and clean after rain, I found her painting on the balcony. The city below shimmered with puddles. Children were drawing chalk suns on the sidewalk. Mara was painting a woman standing in a field of yellow flowers, but the woman's face was blurred, unfinished. I told her it was beautiful. She said beauty was sometimes just sadness with better lighting. I laughed softly, and for the first time, she did too. It was quick, almost accidental, but it changed the air between us. After that, we began sharing small pieces of ourselves. I told her my mother used to sing badly while cooking and insisted every burnt meal had character. Mara told me she grew up in a coastal town where the mornings smelled of salt and orange peels. I told her I had once wanted to be a teacher but gave it up when my mother got sick. She told me she had once believed she would have a family by 30, a studio by the sea, and a life that did not require her to flinch at loud knocks. She did not tell me about Callan at first. I learned his name by accident on a bright Thursday morning when someone left white roses outside our door. Mara saw them and went pale. Not surprised. Terrified. The flowers were tied with a silver ribbon, and there was no note, but she knew. She locked the door, checked the window, and stood in the middle of the room like the walls were closing in. I asked if I should call someone. She shook her head, but her hands were trembling. That was the first time I realized her warning had been built from damage. Over the next days, pieces surfaced. Callan had been her fiancé. Charming in public, cruel in private. The kind of man who apologized with gifts after breaking someone's spirit. When Mara finally left him, she changed cities, changed numbers, and learned to live quietly. She chose roommates not because she loved company, but because empty apartments felt too easy to invade. Her rule was not arrogance. It was fear. She believed anyone who loved her would eventually be hurt by the shadow following her. I wanted to tell her I was not afraid. But that would have been a lie. I was afraid. Afraid of loving someone I could not protect. Afraid of losing someone again. Afraid that my heart, already cracked from grief, would not survive another goodbye. So I did what I could. I fixed the loose lock. I walked with her to the market in the mornings. I learned how she liked her tea. I made jokes when her eyes became too distant. I stayed. The change between us did not arrive like lightning. It came like sunrise, slowly touching everything. Mara began leaving little sketches outside my door, my coffee cup, my old sneakers, my mother's suitcase with flowers growing out of it. I began bringing home oranges because she said they reminded her of childhood. She started sleeping better. I started breathing easier. We cooked together in the golden hours before evening, when the city was still awake and the apartment felt held by light. She would hum while cutting vegetables, and sometimes I would catch myself watching her as if my life had been dark for so long that I did not know what to do with warmth. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Monday morning, tucked under the door. Mara saw it before I did. Her name was written in black ink, sharp and familiar. She did not open it. She backed away as if it were alive. I picked it up and saw only one sentence inside: "I know where you are." The apartment changed after that. Every creak sounded like a threat. Every passing car made her turn toward the window. I begged her to let me help properly, to call the police, to contact a shelter, to tell someone who knew how to handle men like Callan. She said she had tried before and nobody believed bruises when the man causing them smiled at everyone else. But that morning, daylight pouring across the floor, I held the letter and told her she did not have to convince the whole world. She only had to start with one person who believed her. Me. Something broke in her then, but not in a bad way. More like a door opening after years of being sealed. She cried without covering her face. She cried for the girl she had been, for the future she had abandoned, for every time she mistook survival for living. I sat beside her, not touching her until she leaned into me first. When she did, I felt the truth rise in me, huge and frightening. I had fallen in love with Mara Vale. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she needed saving, because she did not. I loved her because even after all life had done to her, she still opened the curtains every morning. But love did not fix everything. That is what stories often forget. Mara still had panic attacks. I still woke some nights reaching for my phone, ready to call my mother before remembering she was gone. We were not two halves making one whole. We were two wounded people learning that healing was not magic. It was breakfast. It was paperwork. It was finding a lawyer who listened. It was filing reports. It was changing locks again. It was Mara deciding, with shaking hands, to stop hiding from a man who had already stolen enough. The hardest day came in full daylight. The sky was blue, almost cruelly beautiful. Mara had an appointment at the courthouse to submit evidence and request protection. She wore a simple navy dress and tied her hair back. She looked calm, but I saw how tightly she held the folder. On the courthouse steps, Callan appeared. He looked exactly like the kind of man strangers would trust. Clean shirt, soft voice, sorrowful eyes. He said her name like a prayer. Mara froze. I stepped forward, but she touched my arm, stopping me. In that moment, I thought fear would pull her backward. Instead, she lifted her chin. Her voice shook, but it did not break. She told him he was not allowed to speak to her anymore. She told him there were witnesses. She told him she was done confusing his regret with love. People turned. A guard approached. Callan's expression changed, just for a second, and the mask slipped. Mara saw it. So did I. So did everyone close enough to matter. Afterward, outside under the bright noon sun, Mara sat on a bench and stared at her hands. I expected tears. Instead, she laughed. Not loudly. Not happily exactly. But freely. Like someone hearing their own voice return after years underwater. She said she had spent so long waiting to be rescued that she forgot she could stand up. I told her standing up was still easier when someone stood nearby. She looked at me then with a softness that made the whole city seem to quiet around us. Weeks passed. The legal process moved slowly, but it moved. Mara began painting different things. Open roads. Kitchen windows. A woman standing in a field of yellow flowers, her face finally clear. I returned to my old dream and applied for a teaching assistant position at a community center. We were still afraid sometimes, but fear no longer owned the apartment. Morning became our favorite time. Daylight filled the rooms, touched the plants, warmed the floor, and made everything feel possible. One Sunday, Mara asked me to come to the rooftop. The sun was rising, turning the buildings gold. She had set 2 cups of tea on the ledge and brought the painting of the woman in the flowers. When I looked closely, I realized the woman was her, but not the version I had first met. This Mara stood with her shoulders back, eyes clear, sunlight all around her. In the corner of the canvas, almost hidden among the flowers, she had painted an old suitcase with tiny blossoms growing from it. She said she had made a rule when I moved in because she thought love was another word for danger. She thought being loved meant being trapped, watched, owned, or eventually abandoned. Then she looked at me and said I had ruined her rule by being patient. By being kind without demanding a reward. By staying without making her feel small. My throat tightened so much I could barely answer. I told her she had ruined my grief by reminding me that life could still grow around loss. We did not kiss like people do in movies, with music swelling and the world disappearing. We stood there in the morning light, both crying a little, both laughing at ourselves, and when she finally leaned toward me, it felt less like a beginning than a promise. Not a promise that nothing would hurt us again. Life does not give promises like that. It was a promise that when pain came, we would not turn it into a prison. We would open the curtains. We would make tea. We would choose the light again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who still believes healing is possible, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Sometimes one story can remind a hurting person that they are not alone. Special request, comment I still believe in second chances if you stayed until this moment. Months later, when the bakery downstairs reopened, the whole building smelled of warm bread every morning. Mara rented a small corner wall there to display her paintings. I started teaching children who reminded me that hope is loud, messy, and impossible to schedule. On our kitchen table, there was still one chipped mug glued carefully back together. Mara kept it there on purpose. She said broken things did not have to disappear. Sometimes they simply became proof that someone cared enough to repair them. And every morning, before the city grew noisy, before fear or grief could remember our address, Mara opened the curtains. Sunlight entered like a blessing. She would look at me over her cup of tea, smiling with those brave, tired, beautiful eyes, and I would remember the first thing she ever told me. Don T fall in love with me. I did not obey. Thank God, I did not obey.